You stand at a quiet crossroads, the kind that smells faintly of rain and coffee, where the streetlights are just waking and the day's noise thins. Mid-30s or early 40s, hands in your pockets, you feel the familiar ache, not just for more money, but for meaning, for permission to breathe. The world told you to measure success by salary, promotions, the tidy numbers in a bank app, and for a long time you obeyed. Tonight, something else arrives, not thunder, but a series of small, clear truths that feel almost like a whisper from God. Why do you shrink from asking for help? One message says, and you remember the time you said no to a partnership because someone might see your weakness. What does generosity cost you? Another asks, and you picture the unopened envelope sitting on your kitchen table, the offers you shelved because you feared they'd expose you. Each sentence is gentle, never shaming, but precise: habits, choices, invisible barriers. You begin to hear them as if someone else is walking beside you, a wise counselor who knows the geography of your defenses. You've built walls with compromise, the voice suggests, and you see the small trades, late nights that steal time, pride that keeps you silent in rooms where your voice matters, a hand that hesitates when it could give. The images cascade: a missed call from an old friend who could have mentored you, a budget that protects against risk but also against opportunity, a smile that guards a guarded heart. The counselor's tone is steady. These are not failures to beat yourself over. They are signs, signposts marking where your flow of abundance slows. You answer quietly, sometimes aloud, but I worked hard for this. Isn't caution wisdom? The counselor only leans closer. Wisdom and fear wear similar clothes. We will learn to tell them apart. In that pause you feel the first flicker of clarity. Small compromises were not neutral, they were bricks. Defensive attitudes were not safety, they were locks. If this gentle nudge lands in you, stay with me. I will show you which attitudes keep the cupboard half empty and how to begin unlocking it. If this resonates, give an emotional like and subscribe with the bell so you don't miss the turning point ahead, because soon the pace deepens, and you will meet the hard truth that asks for a brave answer. You sit at the small table again, the late light sliding across an unpaid bill, your phone buzzing with another promotion you told yourself you'd ignore. The messages you first felt like whispers, little truths about how you dodge responsibility, how you bargain with fate, how you justify small compromises, now settle like morning fog. I stand across from you, not as judge but as an older friend, and I watch your defenses tighten, explanations ready, blame lined up, pride folded like a protective coat. Look at the tiny choices, I say softly, and you look up, surprised at how ordinary the list sounds. Skipping the call from a mentor because you're too tired to be seen asking for help. Choosing the quick thrill of a purchase that quiets the day for an evening and compounds into a weight on your account. Hiding behind busyness so you never have to face the quiet ledger of your priorities. Each is a pebble dropped into the river, you cannot see the dam forming until the water stops moving. The messages from God are not thunderbolts, they are scalpel-sharp truths that reveal the architecture of avoidance. I've always been like this, you whisper. That old refrain is a wall you've been reinforcing without knowing. You learn to protect yourself with scarcity, storing away resources, guarding ideas, shrinking generosity until it fits your fear. Pride whispers that asking undermines competence, avoidance says discomfort is danger. Both keep abundance at arm's length. There is a moment where shame and clarity collide, you feel embarrassed, not for the money, but for the small compromises that eroded your dignity. You see how defensive postures, perfect timing, relentless control, the refusal to be vulnerable, have become safe prisons. I guide you to notice, to name each pattern without guilt, and to feel the weight lift a fraction. This is not condemnation, it's an invitation to begin dismantling what you built in secret. Soon, that invitation will demand choices that feel costly. The coming days will pressure the old habits, resistance will rise, and truth will ask for action. If this quiet recognition stirs you, tap the heart of this moment, like to hold it, and stay with me. Subscribe and ring the bell, the next message will pull you toward the hard, honest work that opens doors. You sit at the kitchen table while the city exhales outside, bills spread like a constellation you don't know how to navigate. I crouch beside you not as judge but as an older compass, and the first truth arrives quiet as breath, you have learned to survive, not to receive. Your voice, small and defensive, answers, I work hard. I deserve what I earn. I let the room hold that pride and then ask, gently, what do you do when an opportunity asks you to risk more than comfort? You look away, fingers tracing a coffee ring, and the admission comes out like steam, you shrink. I tell myself not yet until the chance is gone. In that pause, the messages from God are not thunder, they are precise reflections. I point to the habits that clot the flow of abundance, the little compromises, late payments when you could ask for help, cutting corners on your integrity to save a buck, saying no to mentorship because vulnerability feels like failure. You picture a door with many locks, fear of being exposed, quiet pride that would rather be right than enriched, and the habit of hoarding ideas as if generosity were risk. Is any of this true? You whisper. Your eyes wet with honesty say everything. We walk through a memory, your first contract, the client you lost because you clung to control, the times you declined kindness because accepting felt like owing. Dialogue brushes against the scene, I couldn't afford to look weak, you tell me. Weakness is how you lose everything, I reply, voice steady. The counselor in me names the invisible, scarcity breeds suspicion, and suspicion repels opportunity. Humility, discipline, and small acts of generosity act like oils on a jammed hinge, pride and avoidance are the rest. There is discomfort, then resistance, old defenses rattling as reality presses. Shame comes like a winter draft, but so does clarity. These patterns are not your identity, they are choices you can unmake. If this truth lands for you, stay with it, there is a way to loosen those locks. If you feel this stir inside you, tap like to hold the moment, subscribe and ring the bell so we can walk the next steps together. Next, we will face what it costs to keep these habits and what it looks like to begin choosing differently. You stand in the kitchen again, midnight light pooling on the countertop, the day's receipts a small, suffocating island between your palms. The messages you've been receiving, soft, almost like footsteps, return with new clarity, not demands for sudden wealth, but invitations to examine the quiet behaviors that steer money away. I speak to you not as an outsider but as the voice that leans close when honesty is hard. Remember the small compromises, I say. The autopilot purchases to soothe discomfort, the I'll just wait that postpones planning, the pride that hides asking for help. You can taste the truth like iron on your tongue, it's bitter, and it cleanses. Outside, rain begins, a rhythm that mirrors the steady drip of excuses. You replay tonight's conversations with loved ones, the deflected question about savings, the laughter that covered a trembling admission of fear. In the silence between each drop, an image forms, doors you assumed were locked, not because of fate, but because of habits, the habit of avoiding budgets, of treating generosity as a reward rather than a discipline, of equating self-worth with a padded account instead of consistent stewardship. A memory surfaces, your father's hurried advice, your teacher's offhand remark, and you see how inheritance of mindset suffocated possibility. This is not punishment, I tell you, as you trace a line on an old receipt. It's a correction. The smallest habits stack into the architecture of your life. You remember the early mornings you skipped, the spreadsheets left blank, the prideful refusals to seek counsel. Each choice is a beam placed or removed. Shame flares, hot and embarrassing, but beside it sits something quieter, courage waiting for permission. You find your voice and admit a truth aloud for the first time, I've been defending a scarcity that isn't mine to keep. The admission is small. It is huge. A lightness follows, fragile as dawn. You imagine a different day, disciplined steps, requests for guidance, the humble recalibration of spending into purpose. I promise you this, small, faithful adjustments will open doors more surely than any frantic chase. If this moment touched you, let that feeling be a compass, tap the like that honors your courage, subscribe and ring the bell so we continue together. In the next scene, we confront the first concrete change, a difficult conversation that rewrites a financial pattern. Which habit will you choose to change first? You wake before sunrise, the house still, a single lamp pooling light over unpaid bills and a half-finished business plan. The air tastes like the edges of a promise left too long on a shelf. A soft voice, not loud but insistently clear, slips through the quiet. You protect what you fear. You budget for safety, not for growth. It feels like God speaking in the language of ordinary truths, short, precise, impossible to ignore. You look up, fingers hovering over the papers, and the truth reverberates. You've been defending against loss instead of inviting provision. I sit across from you at that kitchen table, a calm presence, and point to the small choices that have become walls. You tell yourself not yet too often, I say. You call it prudence, sometimes it's avoidance. You judge every offer as risk because you equate asking with weakness. Your jaw tightens. When you refuse help, when pride keeps you silent, you cut off the very channels that lead to help. The room feels smaller as memories gather, the client you didn't call back out of fear of rejection, the investment you dismissed because you weren't ready, the invitations you turned down to avoid vulnerability. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower starts, the ordinary world pressing in, but inside something shifts. A different whisper comes now, generosity opens what's closed. You feel a shame that's oddly liberating, like frost melting under a new sun. The shame isn't condemnation, it's direction. It points to habits, tiny compromises that seemed harmless, a tip withheld, a promise postponed, a lesson unpaid. They add up. They build a dam. We speak less now, the silence is full of decisions. You imagine a door you always thought locked and realize the key was humility all along, the willingness to ask, to learn, to give before you are perfect. Fear loosens its grip, not with a miracle of instant wealth, but with the steady clearing of cluttered attitudes. You make a choice, a small one, to call that mentor, to say yes to a modest risk, to place generosity where instinct had hoarded. Hold that newness. The next steps will show you how to translate this shift into daily disciplines that invite sustainable abundance. If this landed with you, give it a like, a small heart for the courage you just named, and subscribe with the bell so you won't miss the practical shifts coming next. You sit at the kitchen table with a single lamp on, the rest of the house quiet enough to hear the small rustle of an envelope. The messages you thought were coincidence, an offhand comment from a client, a line from a sermon, that persistent whisper during your commute, suddenly line up into a pattern. I'm beside you, not lecturing but steady, asking questions that make your chest tighten. Where did you learn to protect yourself with silence? When did pride start counting as patience? The room feels both intimate and vast, as if the roof could crumble or expand to a horizon. You answer out loud, as if the act of speaking could loosen the knot. I'd been avoiding asking for help. I thought independence meant never needing anyone. Shame flushes your neck. You remember a recent refusal, turning down a partner's offer to collaborate because you were afraid of losing control. You remember letting a prideful "I can manage" cost you a client. Each memory presses like a weight. Resistance surfaces, rationales, old defenses. I earned this, I'm protecting myself. I name them plainly, and the sound of truth makes your hands go still. Then a quieter courage arrives, a small, deliberate choice. You pull out your phone and type a message to someone you once dismissed. Can we talk? I was wrong to do it alone. You open a spreadsheet with shaky fingers and list real numbers, not hopes. You set aside a modest sum, no dramatic generosity, just an offering, and send it to a cause you believe in. The gestures are small, their meaning is not. Humility feels like lowering the shield. Discipline looks like showing up to pay a bill on time or to learn a new skill instead of making excuses. A neighbor thanks you weeks later, unexpectedly, for a loan of time you barely remember. An old contact replies with a new lead. Fear softens into prayerful attention. You breathe, you listen, you act. It's not a sudden miracle, but the air shifts. Patterns loosen where once they tightened. If this moment landed inside you, let it be more than a thought. Like this video to anchor the courage, subscribe so we walk the next steps together, and ring the bell to be notified when doors begin to open. Ahead, choices deepen and opportunity starts to appear. We'll meet that turning point in the next scene. You wake before dawn, the house still soft with night, and there is a quiet you haven't felt in a long time, not empty, but expectant. The messages that first arrived like gentle taps have become a rhythm, Pause before a purchase, speak the truth in a strained conversation, give when your instincts tell you to hold back. You find yourself in the kitchen with a mug warming your hands, and you hear, not as accusation but as counsel, choose differently. You whisper back, I will, and for the first time the promise lands in your bones instead of on your tongue. Outside, the city is beginning its own slow agreement with the day. On the walk to work you notice small tests. A friend offers an easy plan that would cut corners, the inbox brims with tempting shortcuts, a memory surfaces of prideful choices that put distance between you and someone you love. Each temptation no longer feels like fate, it feels like a moment where you can practice a new muscle. You say no to the half-truth that once comforted you and yes to a hard conversation with your partner. I was protecting myself, you admit. I am ready to build trust instead. The admission is awkward and human, and it frees a space where generosity can enter. Practical things change too. You begin to track where money really goes, not as a punishment but as clarity. You set aside a portion for giving before paying anything else, surprising yourself with how it softens your grip. Discipline becomes devotional, the quiet ritual of saving, the steady boundary around impulsive spending, the humility to ask for advice and to accept it. Friends notice. A mentor listens and says, there's maturity in your choices. It isn't praise you need, it's confirmation that you're moving from reaction into intention. Small doors respond. A neighbor returns an old favor, a client remembers your steady integrity, an opportunity appears that doesn't promise instant wealth but asks for commitment. You feel the tightening of fear loosen into trust, not blind trust, but faith shaped by action. If this part of your journey resonates, stay with me. In the next moments I'll share the specific steps that kept this change alive. If you felt something shift just now, give this a heart, subscribe and ring the bell so the next message can find you, because what opens next will ask you to walk through a door you once thought was closed. You wake to a light that slips through the blinds like an invitation. The kitchen is quiet except for the kettle's whisper and the stack of papers you no longer avoid. You set a cup down and breathe as if learning a new language, one that speaks in steady choices rather than desperate grabs. Across the table, a single note from earlier that week sits folded, I have been speaking in small truths. You remember the first message like a bell, gentle, precise. Now the echoes return, but softer, urging you to practice what you've learned. Give what you can, a memory of the counselor's voice says, and you find your hand reaching for an envelope not to hoard, but to send. It's not charity for the show, it's a recalibration. You notice how your fingers unclench as you decide to be generous where you once withheld. The neighbor thanks you for a cup of coffee you didn't need to memorize how to give. A coworker accepts your offer to mentor a junior instead of protecting your status. Small openings appear, a conversation that leads to collaboration, a client who remembers your reliability and calls with new work. Doors are not bursting open, they are swinging because you finally stopped leaning your shoulder against them. You stand in the doorway of your own life and speak aloud, half to the room, half to God. Is this what you meant, you ask? The answer arrives not as thunder but as a simple truth that folds into your chest, I didn't close the door. Doubt did. Pride did. Make room. The counselor's presence is near, not judging but pinpointing. Humility makes you teachable. Discipline keeps your promises. Generosity rewires your expectations. You say the words back like vows, testing them on your tongue until they feel like skin. Shame loses its weight when met with steady action. Fear loosens its grip when you replace blame with accountability. And in those quiet moments, balancing a budget, returning a call, choosing patience, you sense alignment. Prosperity arrives less as an event and more as a path illuminated by consistent light. If this shift resonates, stay with me, I'll show concrete steps to keep these doors open. If the truth touched you, let that feeling land, give a like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next practical lesson that turns these beginnings into lasting abundance. The next step is about building daily rituals that guard this new state. We'll begin there. You sit at the kitchen table long after the dishes are done, a single lamp casting a small island of light over a stack of envelopes and a notebook full of crossed-out plans. Outside, the street is quiet, inside, your thoughts keep rearranging themselves like people trying to find a seat in a crowded room. In that hush a voice, soft, unmistakably true, begins to trace the edges of what has been happening. Not a thunderbolt, but a series of patient observations. You have been protecting your pride, hiding under busyness, saying later to generosity, and expecting security to arrive without real change. Each sentence lands like a gentle nudge, a mirror held up to habits you thought were harmless. You remember a morning not long ago, standing before the mirror, telling yourself the familiar story that you were waiting for the right job, the right moment, the right person. God's message is quieter than your excuses. You are waiting for a permission you already have. The counselor in me asks questions that feel like hands guiding you to breathe. What if scarcity has been a habit, practiced daily? What if pride is the lock on a door labeled abundance? The shame rises. You feel it physically, tight shoulders, the urge to look away. But the shame is not the enemy, it is information, a signal that something needs shifting. We try an experiment. You make a small, brave choice. You call an old contact not to ask for a favor but to offer help. You quiet one defensive thought when a colleague takes credit for your work, and instead of reacting you note it and send congratulations. You give a modest amount to someone in need and feel the surprising release in your chest, as if your hand had been clenched and finally opened. Each act is tiny, almost laughably small, but together they begin to loosen the stubborn habit of scarcity. The environment changes not because the world suddenly offers more, but because your posture toward it softens. There are setbacks, an email that stings, a bill that demands attention, but now you have a different response: humility instead of fury, discipline instead of avoidance, generosity instead of hoarding. The tone inside you shifts from scarcity to possibility. If these moments resonate, promise yourself one small change today. And if this message touched you, like it and subscribe, hit the bell so you won't miss the next step, where the doors that were closed begin to open and the first real signs of alignment appear. You sit at the kitchen table as dusk softens the room, fingers wrapped around a mug gone cold. The quiet gives room for a new kind of listening, one that isn't about budgets or spreadsheets, but about the small, stubborn agreements you've been keeping with fear. I sit across from you, not as judge but as a steady presence. And the words arrive like a soft, urgent whisper: you have traded possibility for protection. You hear it, and in that moment the familiar ache of shame flickers, because the truth is precise and it hurts, but it also frees you from pretending. We speak in the language of detail. I point at the stack of unopened invoices, the habits of saying later, the polite deflections when someone offers help. You admit, quietly, that pride often parades as independence, that avoidance has been a tired companion. You say, I thought working harder would fix it. I reply, hard work without humility is like pushing a locked door. The room shifts. The air is full of the simple things you can choose differently: to ask for guidance, to make a clear budget, to give a small, sacrificial gift even when the math feels tight. Each act unhooks a bit of the old story. Outside, a neighbor returns a borrowed ladder and we both watch him climb without spectacle, an ordinary reminder that asking and receiving are parts of a steady life. You laugh, a small, honest sound, and the tension around your shoulders loosens. We map a few concrete steps: one conversation with a financial advisor, one discipline of tracking expenses for 30 days, one commitment to cheerful generosity. You promise to reclaim your humility. I promise to hold you accountable like a trusted friend. This is not a blueprint for overnight wealth but a plan to change the soil where prosperity grows. If this message settled into you, if it stirred something honest, let it ripple. Like this video, give it a like, subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next gentle cue. In the final act, you'll stand at that once closed doorway and choose to step through. Next, we will open it together. You stand again at the quiet crossroads, the same stretch of pavement warmed by a late afternoon sun, feeling the weight of everything you've carried folded into your shoulders. I sit across from you on the low stone wall, and between us the air is thick with the small, undeniable truths that arrived like gentle notes: the habits you mistook for survival, the compromises you told yourself were temporary, the pride that kept your hands clenched when they could have opened. You say, almost whispering, I wanted more than money. I wanted meaning. I nod and say, then let us begin by being honest with what has kept you from it. We walk through the memory of choices, not to punish but to map. There is the night you turned down a risky conversation out of fear, the morning you chose convenience over discipline, the moment generosity felt like weakness so you guarded your heart and your wallet. Each scene is lit by the same quiet light, the voice of God reminding you that scarcity is a taught stance, not a destiny. You feel shame, and I hold that shame like a lantern so you can see the path it illuminates, patterns to change, apologies to make, systems to build. You're surprised to find courage where you thought only regret lived. When you decide to act, the world does not erupt with fireworks. Doors shift slowly, hinges greased by humility, routine, and a steady, generous hand. A client trusts you because you were honest, a friend joins you because you listened, a small saving becomes a habit that yields options. Prosperity arrives not as an avalanche but as a steady stream guided by new channels, gratitude instead of entitlement, discipline instead of excuses, giving instead of hoarding. You breathe differently. The crossroads no longer feels like an end, it feels like a junction toward a life that matches the small divine truths you finally accepted. If this journey stirred something in you, promise yourself one small action today, say the truth out loud, set one financial boundary, offer one act of generosity. If this message landed, give it an emotional like so it can find someone else who needs it, and subscribe and ring the bell so these gentle nudges keep coming to your inbox and heart. Which attitude will you change today? If you want guidance on the next step, stay with me, there is more to walk through, together.